Hello, I am Mr. Orange and this is video hashtag 458. So in this video I'll be reviewing the first episode of 16. But before we get into this video, make sure to like, share and subscribe. Help me to reach 400 subscribers. Also make sure to check out my recently made videos. But before we get into this video, I want to give you some insight. First thing I want to state that I am a huge fan of 16. I used to watch it growing up. I would always watch it on Pop Girl, and I think it would be on CITV, but I didn't watch it there. So in this channel, I want to talk about 16 episodes individually, just like how I do with Winx Club and Ruby. And of course, I won't be reviewing every single episode of 16. I'm just gonna review the episodes that intrigue me. But I also don't make promises. Just don't make expectations on me. And I don't think anyone ever reviewed each episode of 16. I've seen people make videos of Total Drama like Ultranatic Production. By the way, I highly recommend checking out Ultranatic Production. He reviews every episode of Total Drama. He does a great job. So I would like to do this for 16. I'm also going to do videos on Winx Club and other shows too, alongside it. And I've also tried to take a break from Scooby-Doo content for a while as well. By the way, I did do a lot of content on Scooby-Doo, which is why I want to give it a break for a while. And just so you know, 16 is kind of like a show kind of similar to Total Drama. It's the same company. I think it's Teletoon, but I'm not sure. It's the Canadian company. And while Total Drama kind of replicates reality shows, I think 16 kind of replicates sitcoms. 16 also uses flash animation, which always intrigued me as a kid. Like, I don't mind the animation, but you can tell like from the background, it's like flat surfaces and everything, which I don't mind. It's just very intriguing knowing as a kid. It is very abstract. And I will also add that the theme song really slaps. I love the theme song. And I think it kind of matches with the Friends theme song as well. I've seen a video where like a person kind of does like a comparison to the Friends and 16. They both fit each other. It's incredible. And the Friends characters kind of resembles the Friends cast as well because there's 6 characters and I think each of them kind of resembles each Friends cast. Like Caitlyn would resemble Rachel a bit, like she's a new girl who comes in. Jen kind of resembles Monica, who is the more responsible, mature one. Jonesy kind of resembles Joey because of obviously the name and obviously they're kind of the ladies' man of the group. And I think Wyatt kind of resembles Ross minus the narcissism. He is kind of like love struck all the time and kind of obsessed with love. And I would say Nikki kind of resembles Chandler because she is kind of sarcastic. Chandler is sarcastic all the time. I would say Jude kind of resembles Phoebe because they're both like out there and wild. So that's just all my insight of 16. I hope that you got the gist. So this show is about these 6 individual teens who work at the mall. So 99% of the time you'll see them spending time in the mall. They want to earn some cash, they want to make some love, they want to live life. That's 16 for you. So the first episode is called Take the Job and Stick It. We first get introduced to Caitlyn and Trisha. Caitlyn is one of the main characters. She has a pink top, blonde hair and blue skirt. She is kind of a shopaholic. She is sweet but kind of ditzy. I liked her more in the season 1, more earlier seasons, but she does get a bit more annoying in the later seasons. But ultimately she does mean well. Trisha is the one with the brown ponytail and purple top. She used to be Caitlin's best friend, but she is kind of antagonistic and uses Caitlin a lot. She's stereotypical mean girl, kind of like Heather from Total Drama. I do like the character design for both of these characters, they look really pretty. I personally don't like Trisha all that much, she is kind of mean to others. So they enter the mall. Like 99% of the time, the characters spend time in the mall. I do think that's kind of interesting. When I was a kid, I'd never spent a whole time in the mall. I don't even do that now. By the way, in the UK, we don't call it a mall, we call it a shopping centre. So I do think it's kind of strange that they do hang out in the mall or shopping centre, because I don't think that's what teenagers do nowadays or in the UK. Maybe it's a thing in Canada, I'm not too sure. But also, I was never a social person. I never hanged out with, well, I didn't really make friends with a lot of people. I always been at home and stuff. So, yeah, I don't think I relate to these characters being set in the mall together. This show does remind me a lot of Friends, though. While the characters are likable, just wouldn't relate to them because they're so social together. By the way, Caitlin kind of mentioned that the mall opens early on Saturdays. While I do think that's a cool idea, you just wouldn't get me up that early to go to a shopping centre. I also would like to mention that Trisha kind of looks like Megara from Hercules. I just want to point that out. In the next scene, we have Jonesy and Nikki. Jonesy is a Latino jock character. He's kind of a ladies' man too. While he can be funny and charming sometimes, he's also a massive pervert. I wish he was likable, but he does so many things that are unlikable. He also has a big ego too. I also wish Jonesy wasn't a pervert because I do think this is kind of a racial stereotype of Latino characters, which I do find distasteful. Because I do know there's a lot of Latino people who aren't perverted. So that's one criticism I have with this show is depiction of Jonesy. Not only that, Jonesy has two other brothers who are also gross and perverted. I wish the show didn't depict most characters that are Latino as gross and perverted. And Nikki is an alternative Asian girl with purple hair. She reminds me a lot like Jade from Victorious. By the way, that's another show that this show reminds me of a lot, even though Victorious came afterwards. While Caitlin reminds me of Kat because they're both ditzy, Jen kind of reminds me of Tori because, first of all, they're both brunette, and they also have that both tenacious personality. Wyatt kind of reminds me of Andre. Not only are they both black, but they're both kind of into music. And Nikki obviously reminds me of Jade because they're both mean and tough. Jonesy kind of reminds me of Beck, who is also a ladies' man. And while Jude reminds me of Robbie, because they're both kind of weird too. Like from the conversations we hear from these characters, it looks like they're looking for a job. It's actually kind of normal for teenagers to look for a job, so I don't think this is weird at all. I actually kind of do remember some of my friends mentioning that they did take part-time jobs while they were in school. Actually, a lot of people have done this, but I don't think a lot of people will talk about it. But it's more common for people to start their jobs when they reach the age of 18. At least over here in the UK, from what I've heard. In the next scene, we have Nikki and Jonesy coming towards the table of the lemon squeeze. Wyatt is already sat there, and Jen is working at the big squeeze. So Wyatt is a black guy with the burgundy jumper. Wyatt is a sweet, sensitive, emotionally intelligent character. But he can get too deep sometimes. And Jen is a responsible, tenacious character. So we find out that Jen really wants to work at the penalty box, but they never hire first timers, so she had to take the big squeeze job. That's actually common in most jobs. Sometimes you'll have to have your qualifications, and sometimes you'll have to have a different jobs to get that job. What I find unrealistic though is how easily these characters get their jobs so fast. Especially Jonesy, who has like a new job every episode. I can tell you that I know that very well. I also can state that having a new job is the hardest thing ever. But if you notice, Jen is the same voice actress of Gwen from Total Drama. But I did grow up with 16, so I do have my bias towards this show. I am used to the characters of Jen and Gwen, so I can tell them apart. Anyway, Jen is about to serve the first customer on her last day, and it happens to be Caitlin. So in the show, it kind of implies that Caitlin is rich, and it expects things handed to her. Like Caitlin tries to buy an expensive drink that's not even on the menu. She also tries to pay the drink with her credit card, which is actually kind of normal now. Most people will buy their groceries with their bank card. It's convenient and efficient. But I am aware that there are food places that requires you to pay with cash. I do remember multiple of times where like I've been to a chip shop or a Jack and a Potato parlor, they will have you to pay with cash. I'm not sure why that is. I wonder if this is to do with health reasons or something. So Caitlin buys her drink with cash. They do prejudge Caitlin though, like Nikki mocks the way Caitlin talks. Nikki does give the I'm not like the other girl stereotype sometimes. I do kind of think it's a flaw that Wyatt didn't know who Caitlin was, despite being in the same class as them. Like, Jen kind of mentions that Caitlin is a transfer student to the school. Like, when I was in school, I would probably know the transfer student the most. So Jen and Nikki kind of judge Caitlin for being a spoiled rich girl who doesn't work. While I kind of see the point of like Caitlin being a spoiled rich person, but I don't think she did anything wrong of being rich or anything. Like she didn't shove money down people's faces. And the fact that they judge her for not having a job, I think it's kind of none of their business anyway. Like, why do they care if Caitlin doesn't have a job? So Jen is kind of a responsible mother type character. She pushes the other guys to get their jobs. In response, Jonesy makes an interesting statement. Like, Jonesy believes that to get a job, you gotta smile, look good, and remember that customer is always right. I do think that statement is very interesting. Like Wyatt mentioned earlier that Jonesy sometimes references things from like TV shows and movies or music videos. And I do believe that Jonesy had this statement from a movie or TV show. Like he's kind of influenced by pop culture references. I mean, Jonesy is not wrong though, like with the first two statements, like you got to smile and look good. Well, yes, you're gonna give your resume or CV, whatever. Ultimately, the interviewer will hire someone who is charming and charismatic, which I do believe is Jonesy's characteristics. Maybe that's why he has so many jobs. But I do think the second half of his statement is very interesting, like customer is always right. You don't know how much I disagree with this statement though, especially if your customer is a Karen. And in most cases, Karens are always wrong, so always think of that. So in the next scene, we try to see that Caitlin is trying to shop from Kakibon, but it turns out that her credit card has been declined. It has apparently reached its limit. In my head, I was just thinking, just get a new bank card. I'm not sure how banking works in Canada. Because Caitlin kind of mentions that this credit card is what her father gave her. So I'm like, she can just get a new card for herself. And 4 minutes into the episode, we finally get introduced to Jude. I mean, the fact that his 4 minutes in kind of explains Jude's personality already. Like, Jude is a mellow skater character, he's not very responsible like Jen. Which is interesting when he appears to Jen with his dirty CV. Also, another fun fact, Jude is voiced by the voice actress of Chris McLean. While I can tell Jude and Chris McLean apart, it is kind of distracting sometimes when I hear Jude's voice and I'm thinking of Chris McLean. Like Jude is a chilled out skater guy, and Chris McLean is a completely different character, an adult like 40 years old, who's kind of a narcissist. So I'm imagining him as a skater person. Like, could you imagine Chris McLean as a 16-year-old? Also, every time Jude is talking to Jen, I'm thinking of Chris McLean talking to Gwen. So Jude kind of mentions that the star has 936 stars. First of all, that's a lot of stars. I did my research, and apparently this mall is inspired by the West Edmonton Mall. And the fact that Jude actually counted this is kind of impressive. The next scene, I have so many things to talk about. So Josie calls Jen a stepsis, and Jen replies that the parents aren't married, they're dating. It's kind of foreshadowing what's happening in the future. This also reminds me of Friends because Ross and Monica are siblings. So the main five characters are going off to the dream job interview. When I say dream job, I really mean it. They're going off to the first job, and this is based on what they prefer. It really says a lot about their personality. So Jan goes to her job interview at the penalty box. I think this makes sense for her as her first job interview. She's really into sports and athletic activities. Jude goes to his first interview, which is a skating shop. Which makes sense because he is a skater boy. I think throughout the show, most of the time you'll see that Jude is riding his skateboard. I do think it's interesting that Jude is a skater, and I do know that this show was around the 2000s. But where I'm from, I don't think skateboard was much of a thing. And it's not much of a thing now either. Wyatt gets his first job interview at Grimy, which is a coffee shop. And this job fits Wyatt too. If you know Wyatt in this show, he's a major coffee addict. If this wasn't a kid's show, I'll bet Wyatt would be drinking alcohol. Because I feel like this show sometimes treats coffee like if it's an alcohol. And then Nicky's first job interview is a travel agency. To me, I think that's kind of a boring job interview to go to, but whatever. She wants the money to go to traveling. Maybe this foreshadows what happens at the end of this whole show. But I do think it's kind of weird how Nikki's main interest is traveling when she barely talks about it. I mean, it's mentioned here and there that Nikki's into traveling, but it's never that prominent. And then Josie's first job interview is at Gigantoplex, which is like a movie theatre. In the UK, we call movie theatre cinema. This kind of explains Jonesy's personality. He doesn't want a job just to work. He just doesn't want any responsibility ever. He just wants to watch something, which I kind of relate to. I mean, you're in my channel where I talk about TV shows and movies, so, I can relate to that. That is something I do admire about Jonesy. He is into, watching movies, which I do think he should have get his career into. I'm realizing this now. Jonesy should have been an actor. And the fact that he has so many jobs makes me think that he could have fit in an acting role. And it's not just those guys who are getting a job. Kaylin is also getting a job too. Her father cut her off from giving her money. And she's not happy about it. I also have no clue what job she was going into either. This also kind of implies that Caitlin is kind of naive when it comes to the world of work. The next scene, we get my favorite scene of this whole episode. We actually see each 6 characters getting their job interviews. I think this is a fun way of looking into each character's personality. Bear in mind they take Jan's advice of being polite and honest. Caitlin wasn't around there to take that advice. And it looks like each character is given the same questions. And I think I will go through each question with each character. So the first question they get is why they wanted to work at their chosen jobs. I mean, if we had to be really honest about any job, if we're in a job, we're here for the money. We wouldn't do it for free. So Jen is the first person to answer this. She answers it really clearly, professionally, and honestly. This tells me that she takes really seriously about getting a job. Wyatt says that he's here every day, so he might as well get paid for it. Remember that he wants to work at Grimy at a coffee shop. I mean, it kind of makes sense of hiring your best customer, but I do think there's a big difference of like getting the things from your favorite company and working at your favorite company. Like for example, I like watching movies from Disney, but would I work at Disney? Heck no. And since Wyatt is obsessed with coffee, of course he's gonna work with the coffee. Jonesy's response is the gigantic plex is best place to get pick up chicks. So basically he wants a job at a movie theater just to get some girls. I mean that line there says a lot about him. So basically Jonesy is a hoe, which I'm not hoe shaming. If that's what he's into, I'm fine with it. As long as he's not being gross or anything. And it also shows that Jonesy really doesn't care about working, he just cares about the luxuries. And Nikki's response is that she needs the money to go traveling. I mean, we get it, you love traveling, apparently. But at least she's honest about her response. But I think interviewers hate the phrase, I want the money, so I think that's probably gonna throw them off. And Caitlin didn't even listen to the question. She was like, oh, do you even have an employee discount? So she is more focused on getting the money, not the job. The second question they ask is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? If I had to answer this question, I'll be like, I don't know, because I have no idea. I mean, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Who knows? Wyatt was completely shocked with this question. I bet he wasn't thinking about that question at all. I mean, same bro. Like, if someone asked you where you see yourself in 5 years in split second, what would you say? Nikki gives her answer. She says like she's not gonna work in a mall. One thing I like about Nikki, at least she's honest. And of course, Jonesy is a pervert. He goes like, I know where I can see myself tonight. He was basically hitting on the interviewer. By the way, his interviewer was a female. He would have been surprised. At least we know what Jude wants in 5 years. Rock climbing in New Zealand. I say good for him. Jen gives her honest answer. Obviously she would. She wants to be in the Olympics, it looks like. The third question they get is, what kind of tree would they be? I hate these sort of stupid questions they ask in job interviews. It's so stupid. But Nikki gives her best response by laughing. I mean, I get it. It's a dumb question to ask. Why wouldn't you laugh? If Caitlin dodges the question completely and just insults the person's uniform, she says that a color doesn't suit her. What color doesn't suit her? She basically wears any color she wants. Jonesy really shows his lack of intelligence. Like his first response is Christmas tree, which I think is fair, but the second response he gave was like a dandelion. Like who's dumb enough to not know what a tree is? Wyatt response is that he wants to be a maple tree, but laughs afterwards. I do like Jude's response though. His response was, I thought this was a skate shop, which is fair. Like, why are you asking me questions about trees? Why not questions about skateboarding? Jen wants to be an oak tree, which makes her seem like she's responsible and cares about other people. Based on her response anyway. The fourth question they get is what accomplishment they have got. And of course, Jonesy's response will always gonna be about girls. Like his response was getting second base with this girl, which means like a second date. Nikki's response is perfecting her mother's signature, which I'm surprised Nikki hasn't been to jail yet. Jude ate 10 worms in a day, which is gross, ew. But of course he would. But I am proud of Jen being the youngest to make her soccer team or football team. And Caitlin's response is her accessories. Just so you know, she's into fashion. And the last question they get is, what's the worst quality? Jude mentions that his feet kind of smells. I did think that was a funny response. Caitlin talks about this shirt she wore as a kid. Wyatt says that he has no patience for authority. I do think that's an odd response coming from him. I imagine he's the most likely one to follow authority. Nikki mentions that her list is long, which is implying that she has so many worst qualities. And Josie says that he doesn't have any, which of course an egotistical person would say. So at the end, only Jen managed to get her dream job, which is good for her, bad for the others. They do kind of throw Jen under the bus, particularly Wyatt. Like, Jen tells her how they could have answered the questions, and Wyatt is like, oh, you could have told her 2 hours ago. But Jen did ask them if they could practice their interview questions. Like, it really wasn't her fault that they screwed her up. We then do see Ron coming from the distance. I don't have strong opinions on him yet. I think he's just alright. And I think in this scene is kind of interesting how Nikki describes a guy with wearing a like a Star Wars uniform, and I think she's mentioning Darth without mentioning his name. I just thought that was interesting. So it appears that Caitlin hasn't had a job either, and Nikki was incredibly mean to her with her sarcasms. Okay, there's one thing I don't like about Caitlin is her annoying crying sounds. Like, she's sweet, but every episode she's always crying is so annoying. In the next scene, June acquires his next job, which is Stick It, which is a kebab shop which he owns throughout the first season. So in the next scene, we have the gangs back in the lemon squeeze. They bring their news about what their jobs are. And Jude brings up that he's the manager of Stick It. And he kind of brought up a lie that he worked in 2 shops. But he never worked in a shop before, so how would he work in the shop? But this brings me a question though. Who hired Jude? Because I think in the later of the episode, it is revealed that Jude doesn't have a boss. So Jude is a self-employed worker at a kebab shop. Someone brought up a theory that Chef from Total Drama could have been the original owner and he quitted after June was hired. And few seconds later, Jonesy calls himself a Jonesmeister, which he often does in this show, like he will refer himself as Jonesmeister. And Jude and Jonesy do the signature fist bump thing. That is also common in this show. But there is also another thing that's common in this show. Like, Jude accidentally addresses Nikki as bro, but he is supposed to address her as bra. Like, I think when he addresses a girl, he calls them a bra. Like, he does that throughout the show. And sometimes he calls them dudes and dudettes. I'm from the UK, we rarely use the word dude or dudette. And I never heard anyone call anyone a bra though. So the other characters bring up their news about their new jobs. Josie brings up that he was fired 10 minutes later after hitting on the boss's daughter. And Wyatt brings up that he got hired to a music shop called Spin This, which he is in most of season 1. And Nikki, we all know her job. It's her worst job ever. It's a khaki barn. I also don't understand why it's hatred for country music. I personally don't mind country music. I guess it's kind of average to me, but whatever. In the next scene, Caitlin spots Trisha walking by. She calls out to Trish, and Trish sees Caitlin wearing a lemon hat and a polyester. And just for that, she dumps Caitlin just for that. Like I said before, I don't like Trisha all that much. Dumping her friend because what they wear is kind of cold. But Kaylin isn't better because she also judges people by their clothes. And the fact that she says she never does it to her friend is kind of suspicious. I bet she does. But I do feel sorry for Caitlyn, but at least she got new friends now. And I think from there, the other characters, apart from Nikki, are warming up to her. Josie obviously was easily friends with her because earlier she gave Josie a good advice. And Jude is obviously going to be friends with her. And I think Wyatt also. I think Jan is kind of iffy with her. As for Nikki, I think she has no nonsense for her. In the next scene, we meet a girl called Julie who works at the taco stand. I don't have strong opinions on her, she's alright. Though sometimes it's hard to understand what she's saying because she has a lisp. We then have a scene in the lemon squeeze with Caitlyn and Jan. Caitlyn completely messes things up by dropping her phone in the blender. And then Jen completely blows up on Caitlyn. I know Jen was mean in this scenario, but I can understand her point of view. Like if I was in her shoes, I would lose my patience as well. So at that point, I can understand Jen's point of view. I can also understand Caitlyn's point of view, but she's also wasn't very responsible in her job. So yeah, I do believe Jen has her right to blow up at Caitlyn like that. As a kid, I used to think Jen was the problem because, it was kind of out of order, but you have to understand her point of view. And at most part, at least Jen was really patient with her. In the later scene, Coach Holder blows up at Jen for blowing up at Caitlyn. I personally don't like Coach Holder all that much. He gives us a big sexist energy. And he's also kind of hypocritical because he's blowing up at Jen for doing her job as a manager. And he basically does what she does. So I don't get his point. And if anything, shouldn't Coach Holder be proud of Jen for laying it out on Caitlyn? I mean, this should prove that Jen is a strong leader. By the way, Caitlyn does an awesome thing by sticking up for Jen, and Jen was managed to get her job back. So Jen goes back to the penalty box, and Caitlyn stays at Big Squeeze. So I guess everyone is happy. So now Caitlyn is part of the group now. I think that's great. Jonesy tries to flirt with her, but obviously fails. I did think that was funny though. To be frank, I do like Jonesy when he's flirtatious, but I don't like it when he's a pervert. I just wish they kept Jonesy as a flirtatious person without making him seem icky. Because when he is flirtatious, he is kind of funny and hilarious. So everyone gets the happy ending except Nikki, who gets hired to her job called the Khaki Barn. And the employees of the Khaki Barn are the clones. And I can tell you, the clones are the most iconic characters in 16. They're so hilarious. So that's it for this video. I didn't expect this video to be so long, but I'm really passionate about 16. I really love it so much. Anyways, if you like this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and check out for more of my videos. Have a lovely day.